Erev Torah Batay. Let's continue with the ma'alot that the Torah gives a person. We're almost finished with them. There's a couple of them left. So B'ezrat Hashem, we'll try to finish it off tonight or whatever. We'll see what we can do. So let's go on, right? Yesterday we were talking about the sodot of the Torah, the secrets of the Torah. So we dealt with that, right? We spoke enough about that. Now let's go on, right? And see what else we can find here. So it says over here, ונעשה כמעיין המתגבר, right? וכנהר שאינו פוסק. So what does this mean? This is something, that they call people, מעיין המתגבר. What does this mean? When a person gets to a high level of Torah, he learns a lot of Torah, he becomes a real Talmid Chacham. So what happens is he becomes מעיין מתגבר. So what does this mean? Literally it means, right, it's a wellspring that gushes out. This is literal translation, right? So what does this mean? That a person, who gets to a high level, he's already able to, to do more than just to learn the Torah. He's now able to make his own Chiddushim, in Torah, new things, say new things, which nobody else ever said. Because he has already so much knowledge in the Torah, he can take, from here and here and here and make something new from it, build a building from it. It's like that's the way it is. So a person gets to a high level, and that's what they do, by the way. The big Chachamim, towards the end of their life, they already know the whole Torah, inside out. They know everything. So now what do? What do you do for fun? Excuse my language, right? I'm saying, what do you do to entertain yourself? Right? For a good hobby, So what does the Chacham do? He makes Chiddushim, new things he says in Torah, which were never said. Since he now knows the whole Torah, now he can take from here, and build something and make something new, right? That's what I was talking about, Mayan Mitgaber. So what happens is, that different Chachamim have different ways of doing Chiddushim. Some Chachamim, like Ashkenazim more, most of them, their Chachamim, what they do, they learn Talmud, they like to learn Talmud. This is their favorite pastime for the Ashkenazim, they love Talmud. Right? They love it. They can't get enough of it, right? Day and night they're learning Talmud. So what they do is, now pretty much, once he became a big Chacham, he knows the whole Talmud, more or less, He's got everything in his pocket. But now what he does, he makes Chiddushim, he writes some Chiddushim, he writes a book, a Sefer, and he calls it, right, Chidushei, right, Yonatan, right, whatever, right? Whatever it is, right? Some new things, he writes a book, and he publishes it, and this is now his Torah, it's something that it came from him, from his Neshama. Mayan Mitgaber, that's something, that a person can do also, make Chiddushim in Talmud. Say new things, which were never said before. This is what Rabbi Nachman Bibreslav says, He writes, he was a very big Chacham. So he writes, that the reason why a person came to this world, is to make Chidushei Torah, to say new things in the Torah. So what does that mean? Every person, they say, right, if you want to look at it Kabbalistically a little bit, they say, that each neshama, each Jew, is like one letter in the Torah. He corresponds to one letter in the Torah. There's many letters in the Torah, right? Each neshama is one letter. So what happens is, that each person, according to the shoresh neshama, according to the root of his neshama, has, new things he can say that nobody else can say besides him, because he has a unique neshama that nobody else has. Shoresh neshama. So because of that, if he got to that level, where he learned enough Torah, he can say his own Chiddushim. Nobody else can say those Chiddushim besides him. He's the only one who can make those Chiddushim. As we said, right, some people make the Chiddushim in the Talmud, Ashkenazim like to do Talmud. They love Talmud. They like a Gemara. There are others, as we said, right, yesterday, Rav Moshe Al-Shich, right, he made the Chiddushim in the Chumash. Also, you can do Chiddushim on the Chumash. Say new things, in the Chumash that nobody else ever said. New meanings, new perushim, That's what the Chazal say, right? Shivim panim la Torah. There are 70 ways to interpret the Torah. It's not just one way, I say, well, what's what Rashi says. Okay, Rashi says like this, but there's also other ways to understand. Now Rashi's not the only game in town. So, there's Eben Ezra, right? There's a Seforno. Right? There's all kinds of mefarshim, right? As we said, the Al-Shich, we talked about it yesterday. All these, each one has its own perspective, right? There was also the Abarbanel, right? Who was from Spain. He was he was a finance minister over there, for King Ferdinand, right over there in Sarad, right? So he was, big chacham also. He wrote also his own perush on the Torah, Everybody has his own perush, this one make this perush, this one they make Chiddushim, things. Also the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, right? Rav Chaim Ben Attar. He wrote a beautiful perush on the Chumash, People love to learn this perush. Who loves it the most? The Hasidim, they learn every week, the whole Orach Chaim. They learn everything, from top to bottom. They learn the whole thing. They go through the whole thing. It's considered to be one of the great perushim on the Torah, the Orach Chaim HaKadosh. So each one has his own Chiddushim, as we said, right? That's the way it is. So what happens is, that these Chachamim, once they get to a high level, they write new things, in Torah, Chiddushim, books, new books that come out. Nobody else said these Chiddushim before. Something new. The truth is, they say, right, the Chazal, that even these new Chiddushim, that these rabbis say, they were all given on Har Sinai. It's not like something, that was not given on Har Sinai. Everything was given on Har Sinai. Even these Chiddushim, that these rabbis make, those Chiddushim also were given on Har Sinai. It's just that now, right, this rabbi has a zachut, to make this Chiddush according to his neshama, according to the Shorish neshama, according to the root of the neshama. He has a zchut, to do that. Nobody else has a zchut to bring that Chiddush. So it's beautiful, it's a beautiful thing. Each one, as more the Sfaradim, right? The Sfaradi Chachamim, what do they like to do? They like to Chiddushim in halacha, But we like halacha, They like Talmud, we like halacha. We're halacha people, That's what it is, right? We're different a little bit, a different game, right? Different strokes for different folks. So what happens, right? Many of our Chachamim, the Sfaradi Chachamim, they write books in halacha, new things, new Pirkeh halacha, which never were said before. Why? Because there are new things that come up, new situations that come up, in the world. And somebody has to say, mutar, asur, right, is allowed, not allowed. Somebody has to make this determination, So that's the chidush. It's also something new, that this chacham is coming and saying, that this thing is now asur, it's mutar. How does he know? Because he knows the whole Torah, So he puts everything together. He makes a nice building, And according to the sources that he has, he says this is what applies to this one, and he applies it, right, to the new case. So this is Mayan Midgabar. That's what I'm talking about over here, that these Chachamim are able to, just to say new things in Torah, which nobody else ever said, They just, once they get to that level, where they know the whole Torah, they're just like all the time saying new things, Nobody else was saying these things. It's incredible, That's the zechut, that a person has who became a Talmid Chacham, that he's able to do that. It's an incredible thing, they say, by the way, that each really, right, if each person who comes to this world, if he was going to be Talmid Chacham, right, if he was going to learn Torah, go to yeshiva, and get to the high level like this, he would also write his own book. Everybody could write his own book, with Chiddushim. Everybody could do it. Everybody has the Chiddushim in his neshama. It's just that he has to get to that level, to bring them out. That's the thing, if you get to that level, Zachita, right, Ashecha. You know what it is, right? Let me tell you something. If you don't get to that level, you know what it's going to be, right? You're going to come back in Gilgul. You have to come back because you didn't do your job, yet. You didn't finish your tikkun, right? The tikkun of every neshama is to get to the level where he makes his chiddushim in Torah. That's the tikkun. So if you didn't do it this time, okay, next time. There's always next time, right? Now they bring you back again. That's the thing, That's the way it works. I'll tell you how far this goes, by the way. It goes much further than you think. So I'll tell you a story which Maran, Rabbi, he told us, true story, something amazing. I don't know if I ever said this before here, but there was, as we all know, right, there were the Ben Ish Chai, his name was Rav Yosef Chaim, the Ben Ish Chai, he lived in Baghdad, about 150 years ago, at that time. So what happened was, that he had a Rebbe, he was his Rebbe. Who was his Rebbe? Rabbi Ovadia Somech, right? Was the Rebbe of the Ben Ish Chai. Right? Zivchei Tzedek, exactly, right. So he was a big Chacham, Gdol Ador. He was a big Chacham in Babel. Nobody was like him. Very high level, the big posek. Also, he knew Kabbalah also. So what happened was, that the Ben Ish Chai was his Talmid, as I told you, But they say that the Ben Ish Chai, in Kabbalah, he became bigger than Rav Ovadia Somech, he passed him. He surpassed him, The Ben Ish Chai was very great in Kabbalah. He was like in Shamayim. He was very, very high. He went to a very high level. He had a big zechut for that. So what happened was, that at one time, this Rabbi Ovadia Somech, he was starting to have dreams, certain dreams at night, So what are they telling him in the dream? Listen to this. They tell him, he says, you are the Gilgul of Achaz, Melech Yehuda. This guy Achaz, he was a big Rasha, He was Avodah Zarah, Oved Avodah Zarah, Big Rasha, very wicked king. So they tell him in the dream, you are Gilgul of Achaz. You come from him. You're from his neshama. So what happened was, that one time he dreamt this, So he says, Chalamot Shabi Daberu, right? The dreams are all, they're all nonsense. Dreams are, most dreams, by the way, are nonsense. There's a little bit emet in them, but most of them are nonsense. So he said, Chalamot Shabi Daberu. But what happened was, they showed him again this dream, one more time. And then a third time, So once he saw it 3 times, he was like, this is not a game, This is real. Something is going on over here. There's something true here. So what happened was, that he went to the Ben Ish Chai. As I told you, right? Ben Ish Chai was bigger in Kabbalah than Rabbi Somech. So he went to him and he told him, he said, listen, he says, I'm seeing this dream, they're showing me that I'm the Gilgul of Achaz, Melech Rasha. So what happened was, that the Ben Ish Chai told him, he says, it must be true, whatever they're showing you in the dream. So he says, I'm going to give you a way, a tikkun, to be metaken the neshama of Achaz, since you're his Gilgul. So he gave him a program, it's like you go to Leavdil, right? You go to a doctor, he gives you a program, how to get healthy, you know what I mean? A recept, prescription. That's what he did, he gave him a program, how to fix the neshama of Achaz. Because he was the Gilgul of Achaz. So what do you see from there, right? That even some Rasha, like Achaz, he was Oved Avodah Zarah. He came back, to be Gdol Ador, the big Chacham, like Rabbi Ovadia Somech. So you see that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, always is bringing people back, Gilgul, to fix their neshama, to make tikkun. That's the way it is, Hashem wants to be metaken everybody. He wants to fix everybody,
That king that was, his wife was Isabel?
No, Achaz was in the first temple, right? You're talking about Achav, right? The things, right? Almost the same, right? The 3 letters, the last letter is different, right? Achav, Achaz. This was Achaz, right? Okay, whatever. Right
now you're saying about single thing that happened to somebody. But
right.
We have a story of Rabbi Akiva, 24,000 students.
Yes, right. Yeah. Why do I tell you this story? The reason why I say this is because, you see, right, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if you don't make the tikkun this time, he brings you back again. What do you think is going to happen? You don't do it. You're going to have to come back. So that's the thing. A person has to make his Chiddushim, in Torah. So he has to come back, if he didn't do the tikkun. That's the way it is, So you see, right, that it's a very important thing, this thing, to become Mayan Mitgaber, right? A Nahar Sheno Posek, right? Another thing it says over here, right? Which is a river which never stops. So what does that mean? It's like this person, becomes Gadol in Torah. His Chiddushim are coming all the time, day and night, non-stop, until he dies, the day he dies. But that's how it was with Maran. Rabbi, right? He wrote, how many books did he write, Maran? 54 books he wrote, All of them very big, great books. All of them very large and, very massive, right? All kinds of things. How did he do this? Day and night he was sitting, and writing all the time. He had a pen. He didn't have a computer. He was old-fashioned, old style, old school. He was old school man. No computer, no electronics, no nothing like that. He didn't have anything like that, He was old school. Just had a pen, paper, and he just writing, And what he would do is, once he would finish writing, he would give it to, one of his, shamashim, right? And they would do one on the computer. They would print it up, and publish the book. But he wrote everything pen and paper, the old way. He was writing Chiddushim all his life, like until the end of the day that he died, By the way, they say that before he died, what happened was that he fell down, he had a fall, and he injured his back, his spine. That's how he died, towards the end. So what happened was, that the pain was so excruciating, in his spine, he couldn't anymore learn Torah and write anymore. He couldn't, he had to stop, So what he did? Once he had to stop, writing Chiddushim and learning Torah, he told HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He says, if I can't do this, he says, please take me. He says, I don't want to be here anymore, I'm not interested in being here anymore. He asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu to take him, because he says, what is it worth it to me, if I'm not learning Torah, writing Chiddushim, writing books, this is what I do in my life. It's not worth it for me to live. What's the purpose of it? So it's true, HaKadosh Baruch Hu took him, just like he requested. That's what happened, What can you do, right? That's the way it goes. That's the way it goes with people, Because some people have a tikkun, whatever. So that's the way it is with these things. Okay. So I guess we'll stop here, B'ezrat Hashem. We'll continue next time. רבי חנן שאומר אצל הקדוש ברוך הוא לעוסק את ישראל, לפי כך ירבה להם תורה ומצוות שנאמר אדוני חפץ למען צדקו יגדיל תורה ויאדיר.